Why do so many men suffer in silence, smile when they're breaking, and act strong when they're barely holding on? What's really going on behind that quiet face, that calm exterior, that so-called toughness? The answer is not weakness. It's conditioning. From the moment a boy begins to walk, speak, and show emotion, he's taught directly or indirectly that expressing how he truly feels makes him less of a man. Society doesn't say it out loud, but the message is everywhere. Real men don't cry. Real men don't complain. Real men don't talk about their feelings. So the boy begins to hide them. He learns to armor up, to lock his emotions behind a wall of silence. And by the time he becomes a man, the habit is deeply ingrained. He doesn't even question it. He just carries it, alone. Society has programmed men to believe that emotion is the opposite of strength. That showing sadness means you're unstable. Showing fear means you're weak. Showing hurt means you've failed. So instead of dealing with emotion, men bury it. They distract themselves. They throw themselves into work, into routines, into silence. And even when the weight gets heavier, they pretend it doesn't exist, because the fear of looking vulnerable is greater than the pain they're actually carrying. That's the tragedy. Men are not born emotionally shut down. They are trained to be. They are told to man up before they even understand what that means. They're told to stop crying, to toughen up, to fight through it, to handle it like a man. But no one ever tells them how. This early programming starts at home, at school, on the field, in culture. A boy who expresses his pain is teased. A boy who talks about his emotions is told he's being dramatic. So he begins to believe that silence equals maturity, that holding it in is a virtue. And what starts as a survival instinct becomes a lifelong pattern. The man grows up not even knowing how to express what's going on inside him, because he was never taught how. He may feel anger, but behind it is sadness. He may shut down, but behind it is fear. And because he was never allowed to face his emotions, he never learned how to own them. Instead, he hides them behind jokes, behind sarcasm, behind work, behind a smile that says, "I'm fine," when he's not. This is not a question of masculinity. It's a question of humanity. Every human being, male or female, is born with emotion. It is a natural response to life. It is a signal, a teacher, a guide. But when emotion is suppressed, it doesn't go away. It just goes underground. And underground, it becomes pressure. It becomes frustration, stress, emotional numbness. And in some cases, it becomes something darker. This is why so many men feel alone, even when they're surrounded by people. This is why some men succeed on the outside but feel empty inside. Because the version of masculinity they were sold doesn't leave room for truth. And the truth is, emotions don't make you weak. Denying them does. What if the real reason men stay quiet about their pain isn't because they don't feel it, but because they're afraid of what will happen if they do? Fear is a powerful force, not just the fear of danger or failure, but the fear of judgment. And for most men, that fear runs deeper than they'd ever admit. They fear being seen as weak, as emotional, as soft. They fear the looks, the whispers, the silent disapproval of being too sensitive. So instead of opening up, they shut down. They wear masks that hide their real selves. Masks that say, "I'm fine," when they're breaking inside. They become masters of disguise, not because they want to deceive others, but because they're terrified of being exposed. This fear of judgment becomes more powerful than the pain itself. And that's where the silence begins. Men grow up watching how the world responds to vulnerability. They see it punished, mocked, dismissed. They hear phrases like "man up," "stop whining," "don't be so emotional." These aren't just words. They're rules. Invisible rules that teach men how to survive in a society that rewards strength and punishes softness. So when a man feels hurt, ashamed, scared, he doesn't express it. He edits himself. He swallows his truth. Because deep down he believes that revealing emotion is the fastest way to lose respect. And respect in a man's world is everything. The fear of losing it shapes how he talks, how he walks, how he lives. It teaches him to stay in line, to keep his voice steady, to never let them see him bleed. This fear creates a cycle. A man feels pain, but doesn't speak it. He hides it behind work, jokes, anger, silence. People think he's strong because he doesn't complain. They call him disciplined, composed, mature. But inside he's fighting battles no one sees. And the more he hides, the harder it becomes to share. The mask becomes part of him. He forgets who he was before he put it on. The image of strength becomes a burden. He's praised for being unshakable, but that praise becomes a trap. He can't drop the act now. Not when so many people look up to him. Not when his identity is built around being the strong one. So he keeps it together, on the outside. Even when everything is falling apart, he convinces himself that showing emotion would make things worse. That being real would be a mistake. There's a quiet myth that lives deep in the minds of most men. A myth passed down through silence and reinforced by culture. A belief that the man who feels nothing is the man who has mastered himself. Emotional silence is often mistaken for control, but in reality it's a mask built on fear, pressure, and survival. From the outside, the emotionally quiet man looks composed. He looks unshaken, calm, in charge. People admire his ability to stay cool under pressure, to not get rattled, to stay strong. But underneath that silence is often a storm he has never been taught how to face, let alone share. And the more he suppresses it, the more he convinces himself that he's doing the right thing. Because to him, silence equals power. But what if that silence isn't power at all? What if it's just another form of emotional avoidance? Men are often praised for being stoic, for being unbothered. But what most people don't see is that emotional control and emotional numbness are not the same. One comes from deep awareness and strength. The other is a survival response, an internal decision made long ago that feelings are too dangerous to handle. And so, expression is replaced with suppression. Sadness gets buried under distraction. Pain gets hidden behind performance. Disappointment gets masked with sarcasm or jokes. But the cost of this silence is high. Without release, emotion builds up like pressure in a sealed container. And at some point, it finds a way out. Sometimes in explosive anger, sometimes in withdrawal, sometimes in emotional shutdown that ruins relationships and disconnects a man from the people who care about him. The real tragedy is that many men don't even know how to describe what they feel. They've been taught to think in terms of logic, outcomes, and performance, not emotion, intuition, or vulnerability. So when something hurts, when something breaks inside, they don't say, "I feel betrayed," or "I feel scared." They just go quiet. They retreat. They work harder. They get irritated by things that don't matter. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they were never taught how to process those feelings in a way that makes sense. And so silence becomes the default, not because it's healthy, but because it feels safe. But the silence that protects also isolates. And over time, it creates a gap between who a man really is and who he's pretending to be. The truth is, most men confuse vulnerability with failure. They think that opening up means they're broken, soft, or less of a man. But that belief is one of the most damaging lies ever told. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's raw strength. It's the willingness to be seen as you are, even if it's uncomfortable. It's choosing truth over image, connection over ego. But this kind of honesty feels risky. It feels dangerous. Because when a man has been conditioned his whole life to perform strength instead of feel deeply, vulnerability feels like jumping without a parachute. And yet the very thing that feels like a threat is often the one thing that could heal him. When a man finally allows himself to say, "I'm not okay," or "I don't know what I'm feeling," or "I need help," something powerful begins to shift. The weight he's carried alone begins to lift. The walls begin to crack. And through that crack, real connection can enter. Not just with others, but with himself. Because strength isn't about pretending you're invincible. Real strength is knowing that your heart is not a liability. It's a compass. And when you stop fearing your emotions, you stop fearing yourself. There's something heavy that most men carry, but never talk about. It doesn't show up on their face. It doesn't come out in their words. But it's there, in the silence, in the way they breathe, in the way they avoid certain conversations, in the way they say, "I'm fine," with eyes that tell a different story. The truth is, unspoken pain doesn't disappear. It doesn't dissolve with time. It transforms. When men don't process what they feel, that emotion doesn't just vanish. It gets redirected. And most often it turns into either anger or apathy. One erupts, the other shuts down. And both are signs of deeper wounds that were never healed, only hidden. A man who never learned how to express sadness will often express it as rage. A man who never felt safe to say, "I'm hurt," may instead say nothing, shutting down emotionally, building walls so high that even he forgets what's behind them. This is why many men appear either cold or reactive, not because they lack emotion, but because they're drowning in it with no tools to navigate. Pain doesn't just stay buried. It leaks. It comes out in how he speaks to his partner, in how he treats his kids, in how he escapes into work, into distractions, into silence. When men are taught that emotion is weakness, they stop learning how to feel, and what you don't feel, you can't heal. Over time, this creates a deep emotional disconnect, not just from others, but from the self. When you numb your feelings long enough, you begin to lose the language of your own heart. You stop recognizing what's really bothering you. You stop knowing what you need. You stop identifying your own emotional signals. It's like driving a car with the dashboard lights broken. You don't know when something is overheating, leaking, or about to fail. Most men are emotionally running on empty, but because they look functional on the outside, no one checks under the hood. There comes a point in every man's life when silence is no longer strength, when hiding becomes heavier than healing, when the pain of pretending is greater than the fear of being seen. Real power doesn't begin when a man learns to fight the world. It begins when he confronts himself, when he stops running from his own emotions, when he stops numbing his truth, when he finally stands in front of the mirror and admits, "Yes, I feel this. Yes, I hurt. Yes, I need to release what I've locked away for years." That moment, though terrifying, is the birthplace of transformation, because the man who confronts his emotional truth is the man who finally starts to understand what freedom actually feels like. Most men spend their lives trying to control everything around them, their environment, their image, their performance, but never learn how to face what's going on inside. They're taught how to win, how to achieve, how to dominate, but not how to cry, not how to feel, not how to forgive themselves. And that's why so many men feel powerful in public, but powerless in private. They know how to conquer, but not how to connect. They can command a room, but can't have a deep conversation with the person in the mirror. But the truth is, real mastery isn't about domination. It's about alignment. It's about being so deeply rooted in your emotional truth that nothing outside of you can shake your center. That kind of emotional power doesn't come from suppressing feelings. It comes from facing them, understanding them, and using them as fuel instead of fear. A man who has confronted his emotional truth becomes dangerous in the best possible way. Not because he lashes out, but because he's no longer hiding. He speaks from clarity. He moves with purpose. He no longer lives by the expectations of others, because he has finally met himself. He knows what he stands for, what he feels, what he wants. And that kind of self-awareness is rare. That kind of grounded presence is powerful. He doesn't need approval, doesn't need validation, doesn't need to wear a mask, because he knows who he is beyond all that. That's the man who doesn't run from discomfort, who doesn't fake strength, who doesn't live in denial. That's the man who's free. And this is where most people get it wrong. Mastery of emotion isn't about control. It's about conscious direction. It's not about forcing yourself to feel nothing. It's about learning how to feel deeply without drowning. It's about taking all that emotional energy and channeling it with precision. Anger becomes focus. Sadness becomes empathy. Fear becomes awareness. You don't get rid of emotions. You train them. You build a relationship with them. You become the master of them, not the victim of them. Just like you'd train your body in the gym, your emotional state requires intentional practice. It's a discipline. It's an art. And most importantly, it's a choice. When a man learns to direct his emotions instead of denying them, everything changes. He communicates better. He leads better. He loves better. He becomes harder to manipulate because he's no longer ruled by suppressed pain or unconscious reactions. His mind becomes clear. His actions become intentional. He no longer carries the weight of things unspoken, and that gives him energy, mental energy, emotional energy, spiritual energy. That energy, when focused, becomes power. And that power doesn't come from being emotionless. It comes from finally understanding that emotion is not a liability. It's a language. It's a compass. And when you learn how to listen to it, you stop being controlled by your past and start building your future with clarity and fire. There's a hidden war that most men are fighting every single day, and the world barely notices it. It's not a war with the outside world. It's internal. It's the constant battle between what they feel and what they're allowed to show. This silent tension shapes everything. It affects how men love, how they work, how they lead, how they live. But here's the truth that no one's talking about. Emotional healing isn't optional anymore. It's survival. And the man who ignores it isn't avoiding pain. He's dragging it into every part of his life. Healing doesn't mean becoming soft. It means becoming whole, because the man who doesn't heal will pass his wounds on to everyone around him. His relationships suffer, his purpose becomes cloudy, and his inner peace is traded for emotional chaos masked by routine. Emotional healing starts when a man finally decides to stop pretending everything's fine, when he stops numbing himself with distractions and starts asking real questions. Why do I feel so disconnected? Why am I angry all the time? Why do I push people away? These questions open doors, and walking through them requires courage. Most people will never understand. It's not easy to face pain that's been buried for years. It's not easy to admit that you're still holding on to something from childhood, from betrayal, from loss, from rejection. But that's where the process begins. Healing isn't loud. It's slow. It's messy. It's often done in silence, behind closed doors, away from the spotlight. But every step toward it is a step toward real power. Not the kind that comes from status or control, but the kind that comes from deep inner alignment.